They skipped my military honor for a handbag, so I gave their inheritance to a stranger who actually deserved it. 3 hours before I stood on a stage to receive the Bronze Star, my mother told me she couldn't make it because my sister needed her for a shopping trip. That single sentence, tossed off like it meant nothing, was the last thread holding our family together. And in exactly 90 minutes, on live television, a 2-star general was going to hand a life-changing gift to the exact person my mother had chosen instead of me. My name is Grace Alden. I'm 28 years old, and for 6 years, I served as a combat medic with the Army in Eastern Europe. I grew up in a house where my worth was measured in dollars, and my sister's worth was measured in likes. My parents, Diane and Frank, had one golden rule. Whatever Grace earns belongs to this family, and whatever Melissa wants, this family provides. Melissa was 23, an aspiring influencer who sold skincare products to 12,000 followers and called it a career. I was the daughter who bled for a living, and somehow that made me the disposable one. Every deployment, my hazard pay wired straight into a joint account my parents controlled. Every reenlistment bonus disappeared into Melissa's rent, Melissa's photography packages, Melissa's designer wardrobe for brand partnerships that never quite materialized. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself that one day, my sacrifice would earn me a single sentence. "We're proud of you, Grace." I never got it. The breaking point came on a freezing night outside a supply depot when a Humvee rolled over an unstable embankment, and I spent 4 hours pulling 3 soldiers out of the wreckage with a dislocated shoulder and a headlamp that kept dying. I earned a commendation that night. I also earned a phone call from my mother the next morning, asking why my direct deposit was late, because Melissa needed $600 for a networking dinner. I stood in the mud, my shoulder still throbbing under a sling, and I didn't cry. I just felt something inside me go quiet and cold, like a door closing softly in another room. When my company commander submitted my name for a Bronze Star, I requested exactly 2 VIP seats for the ceremony. I mailed the invitation myself, the paper thick and embossed with a gold service seal. I told myself this was the final test, not an olive branch, a test to see if my parents could put down their phones and their vanity for one single evening and watch their daughter stand on a stage she had bled to reach. They failed before the invitation even arrived. 3 days before the ceremony, my mother called to say they'd already booked a consultation with a modeling agent the same afternoon because Melissa had a rare opportunity to meet a scout in from the city. Rare opportunity. As if my Bronze Star was a scheduling inconvenience. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply hung up and I made one phone call instead. To the only person who had ever shown up for me without being asked. Her name was Aunt Ruth, my mother's older sister. Ruth had spent 35 years as a hospice nurse, the kind of work nobody applauds and everybody needs. While my parents chased status, Ruth had chased nothing but the next person who needed her hands. When I was overseas, it was Ruth who sent handwritten letters every single week, who never once asked me for money, who always asked if I was eating enough and sleeping enough and staying warm. I called her 2 nights before the ceremony. "Aunt Ruth, I need you in a dress and on a train to the base by Thursday morning." There was no hesitation in her voice, no questions about the cost of a ticket. "I don't care what you're being honored for, sweetheart," she said. "I just want to see you standing there with my own eyes." The morning of the ceremony, I picked her up from the station myself. She wore a simple navy dress she'd probably owned for a decade, and she carried an old canvas bag instead of a suitcase. Compared to Melissa's designer luggage, it looked like nothing. To me, it looked like everything. We sat together in a folding chair reserved for family, front row, 10 feet from the podium. The gold VIP seats beside us, the ones meant for Diane and Frank, sat completely empty. I felt the cameras pan across that empty space, and for one flickering second, something in my chest ached. Then I looked at Ruth, and the ache disappeared. General Marcus Hale stepped up to the microphone. He did not sugarcoat anything. He described the collapsed embankment, the crushed vehicle frame, the freezing rain, and the 3 men I had pulled out one at a time with a dislocated shoulder and nothing but sheer stubbornness. When he read my name, the entire auditorium rose to their feet in applause that rattled the folding chairs. I walked up, accepted the medal, and returned to my seat beside the woman who had actually shown up. Then General Hale did something nobody expected. He opened a second folder. "Tonight," he said, his voice carrying through the amplified speakers, "we are also recognizing someone who has spent her entire life in service without ever wearing a uniform. The Department of Veterans Affairs is proud to announce a new civilian recognition initiative, honoring the caregivers who hold our soldiers together when the battlefield finally lets them go home." He looked directly at our row. "The inaugural recipient is Ruth Callahan." Ruth turned to stone beside me. She stopped breathing entirely. On the massive screen above the stage, her face appeared in high definition, eyes wide, utterly bewildered, tears already welling in the creases around her eyes. General Hale read the award in full. A fully funded retirement healthcare package covering every medical need for the rest of her life, a paid-off mortgage on whatever home she chose to live in, and a standing invitation to travel anywhere in the country, fully covered, for the remainder of her working years, in recognition of decades spent easing the suffering of others without ever asking for recognition. It was, without exaggeration, a life-altering fortune, handed on live television to a hospice nurse in a decade-old dress, because she had spent her life giving without expecting anything back. I walked her up to the stage myself. I watched General Hale shake her hand and bow his head slightly, a gesture of genuine respect. I watched the camera zoom in on her tear-streaked face, and I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly where my parents were sitting at that moment. They were at the modeling agency's rooftop reception, sipping champagne, watching Melissa pose for photos with a scout who probably wouldn't call her back. And somewhere in that room, on a wall-mounted television, the broadcast was playing. My phone had been buzzing in my pocket for the last 20 minutes of the ceremony. I didn't check it until we were walking back to the car. 49 missed calls, dozens of frantic texts. "Grace, call me right now. Grace, this is insane. Tell them to give that money to Melissa instead. Grace, we are your actual family. How could you let a stranger take what belongs to us?" A stranger. My mother called the woman who raised me in every way that mattered a stranger. In the same breath, she demanded I redirect a life-changing reward to my sister. I muted my phone and drove Ruth to a hotel myself, made sure she was settled, and told her I'd see her in the morning. I didn't respond to a single message that night. They showed up at my apartment 2 days later. All three of them, standing in the hallway when I stepped off the elevator, my father pacing, my mother clutching her phone like a weapon, Melissa in tears that looked rehearsed the moment I recognized the timing. "You need to call the general," my mother said the second she saw me. "Tell them there was a mistake. That money should go to this family. We need it more than some old nurse who's probably going to die soon anyway." Something in me went very still. I looked at the three of them, standing there in the hallway, demanding I commit fraud against the United States government to fund a lifestyle that had never once included room for me. "I'm not calling anyone," I said. My voice came out flat and steady. "Ruth earned that. You didn't even show up." My father stepped forward, his face reddening. "You owe this family," he said. "Everything you have, you owe to us." "I owe you nothing," I said. "I gave you 6 years of hazard pay and every reenlistment bonus I ever earned. I gave you every chance to show up for me exactly once. You chose a modeling scout over your daughter's medal. That's not a mistake I'm going to keep paying for." My mother's face crumpled into tears, the same tears I'd watched fail to work my entire childhood. Melissa screamed something about her reputation, about how the broadcast had embarrassed her in front of her followers. I let them finish. Then I stepped back into my apartment and closed the door, quietly, deliberately, and locked it. I didn't hear from them again for months. When I finally did, it was through a mutual cousin, who told me my parents had drained their savings trying to fund Melissa's stalled career, that the joint account I'd unknowingly fed for years had finally run dry, and that reality had arrived exactly on schedule. Ruth, meanwhile, moved into a small, paid-off cottage near the coast, the kind of quiet, sunlit home she'd spent her whole life giving to other people instead of herself. Every time I have leave, I drive out to see her. We sit on her porch with tea, and she tells me about the trip to the coast she's finally taking. And I tell her about the new medics I'm training. There's no yelling, no demands, just the quiet, solid peace of an actual home. Looking back, I understand now that loyalty was never about blood. It was about who shows up when it costs them something. My parents wanted a daughter who paid the bills and stayed silent. What they got instead was a soldier who finally learned the difference between family and forced obligation. If you've ever been treated like a resource instead of a daughter, I hope you find the strength to walk away the way I did. Real family shows up. Everyone else is just waiting for the next invoice. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and like it. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories like this one.